measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow and is divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of American capitalism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he's going to receive a kick in his bad bottom. When a military bullet crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragedy of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption, whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. What matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kinds of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfilled or not. Your leftists in the United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist. He was executed by a new Marxist who was more Marxist than this Marxist. Same happened in Afghanistan when first there was Taraki, who was killed by Amin, then Amin was killed by Babrak Karmal.
Okay, so let me just, let's a few people just sort of shuttle in, but everybody, I'm happy to have Dr. Richard Fleming, good friend to the channel. We spun this up real quick, so I don't have Richard's CV to hand, but maybe whilst people are streaming in, Richard, you could give us a little bit of your background again and your speciality.
Well, I'm a physicist, cardiologist, nuclear cardiologist, who also unfortunately has a law degree. I also have a master's in psychology and several undergraduate degrees, and have been doing about 52 years worth of research, 52 this year, in a variety of areas that I consider all connected, but one thing led to another. As you know, when you get involved in research, you start investigating one thing and just continue to pursue that down the applicable tracks as you find answers and more questions develop.
Yeah, and 52 years is it's nearly double mine at the bench. So bravo to you for keeping it up, because I have reached the point that I've had enough. A lot of what I discuss right now is just how broken I see the institutes and the people involved taking part in this. And so I think as much as we're going to light up, obviously, the more egregious cranks, but maybe as a hors d'oeuvre, you could maybe give us your impressions of 52 years of history at the research front, and how have things changed in your eyes?
You know, when I eventually got into medical school, I really did see myself as becoming strictly an academic nuclear cardiologist. That would have been probably my job of choice. But even at that time, which was the early to mid 1990s, I was already seeing changes in academia that showed that there was a shift in the field, that the scientists that I respected and looked up to from the 1920s and 30s and 40s no longer were existing by the time I was in my academic setting, and the people that had replaced them were people that were really there for prestige and glory and patting themselves on the back, and that became an environment that I didn't want to stay in. I wrote, even when I was a cardiology fellow, several research papers, and instead of receiving a positive response to that, what I received was a response from people, cardiologist attendings that were already there, that they hadn't been publishing that much work, and they were upset by the fact that I was publishing that amount of work and getting recognized for it. And I realized that that was not the type of environment I wanted to be in. So medicine and science has shifted from, I think, people that genuinely had questions that were trying to pursue the answers and try to make science and in particular medicine better, to a group of people now that are just very good at collecting funds from the federal government and other agencies and really don't care if the quality of what they produce is worthwhile or not. And it's kind of the song tradition, from Fiddler on the Roof is very applicable for many areas of medicine where people don't want to look at new ideas or new approaches, which is how we got to where we are to begin with. But there is an awful lot of what's in it for me mentality versus what's in it for the rest of the world.
Yes, I mean, that's I didn't see that change. For me, it was the change with respect to the institutions being preyed upon by the critical theories, and the STEM held out for a long time, but I think in the last year we have seen that it's been fully subverted, with nature science coming out and telling people to strike in honor of George Floyd, and then them coming out and saying, do not vote for Trump. Now, I've never seen such an egregious step into the social domain. Well, you know, there was obviously the big push with respect to climate sciences previously, but it was spaced out and it wasn't as concentrated as we've seen this year. But those events, to me, have just crystallized that those journals now are nothing but a vanity press.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there's a point that you have to, you know, I still review for like 17 or 18 journals, one of them in physics, so I can keep my hands in it. And there's, you know, when major medical journals are publishing papers from Bill Gates, that type of thing. I mean, he's not qualified to be writing papers for New England Journal of Medicine. Maybe for something in computer science, but you know, money seems to talk an awful lot to a lot of people, and the journals are fairly influenced. I mean, I may or may not have mentioned to you, but you know, I've been doing research on COVID, and we now have closed that trial down. We had 1,800 people that were originally selected for it, and I'm sitting here working on the data, and I know we have some significant things to tell. The question is, where will we get that published? Because there are a whole host of people that don't want to see things published by myself or other people, and they will do whatever they can to try to interfere with that. And so the question really is, you know, getting the right information out to people, and having vested interests not influence the journals or what's being published or talked about.
So I think it would be a fair summary to say that there's enough vested interests from pharmacy companies who have just picked up billions for their warp speed vaccines, whereas your approach has been very much a pragmatic one, which is step-by-step treatments of the patients as they come to the clinic. Is that fair?
Yeah, you know, it is, because the question is, when you have a health problem, you need to know, I mean, there's two questions to really ask. One is, what types of tests are you going to do? And those tests should be tests that are used to confirm or deny what you believe is going on, but they should only be done if, in my opinion, if it's going to change your treatment strategy. And so just doing a test because there's a test to do isn't scientifically or medically sound. And then the question is, you know, treatments, and you need to have an objective way of knowing which treatments are going to work, which treatments are not. You know, there's a lot of misinformation about the different drugs that are available for COVID-19. It doesn't seem to me, listening to the powers that be, that anybody's thinking through what these drugs' actual mechanisms of actions are. I mean, they're classifying agents as antiviral or antimalarial or antibiotic, but they're not looking at how those viral, bacterial, fungal agents actually work, and are they applicable then to COVID-19? You know, there's a classic case example. It would be azithromycin. And I've listened to the people who support Zithromax, or zithromycin. And there's a lot of discussion about preventing secondary infections, but no actual explanation about why this should work for the virus. Well, it turns out that there are published papers on azithromycin in the treatment of viruses. And it does turn out that azithromycin has been used in cell cultures with glial cells with Zika virus. And when the azithromycin was used, as the dose stepped up, there was less and less replication of the Zika virus and healthier glial cells, which is interesting because, Big Pharma would tell us that antibiotics won't harm human beings because, for example, the macrolide antibiotics like azithromycin affect ribosomes that have 30 and 50 S subunits, and humans have 40 and 60 S subunits. So the argument has always been it'll kill bacteria, but nothing else, and it won't hurt the person because your ribosomes are different sizes. Well, it turns out, from that last study that I commented on with the Zika virus, that's obviously incorrect, or it couldn't inhibit a virus with human glial cells as the only material there. There were no bacteria in that culture. So, even that raises questions about what else Big Pharma is not presenting accurately.
Mm-hmm.
But it's clearly not telling us the truth about the fact that these antibiotics can have an effect on human cells. Now, I would be comfortable with the Big Pharma saying, we know it may have an effect on human cells, but look, it has more of an effect on more rapidly developing cells like the bacteria that you're trying to kill than it does on slower growing cells like glial cells of the brain or myocardial cells of the heart or something else.
And
but they don't do that.
Apologies. I would just interject at that point that, I spend a lot of the time on this channel speaking about the neurotropic agent or the properties of SARS. And, I think a lot of stuff that's being missed is especially people who get really severe, is the assault in the medulla, and perhaps that's where we need the protective effects of something like zithromycin to get in there and stop the virus, passaging up the cell, dividing, and then passing on to other neurons in the network. So that's something to keep in mind. And what I want to do now, because we were just sort of waiting for the chat to fill up, the stream to fill up. So I usually wait for sort of 30 people. We're at 34 right now. So what I want to do is just give everyone a breakdown of or a synopsis of what we wanted to achieve with this stream, and that was to approach some of the claims being made by those advocating the terrain theory, those that have advocated or tried to say that the debate has been lopsided, and we saw that sort of come to a head on Saturday evening, or it was Saturday, where Rob from Transparent Media Truth came into my chat. I wasn't even sort of doing anything SARS related. We were just covering the riots, and he proceeded to tell the chat that terrainers are winning the debate, and I responded that that's nonsense, and his rebuttal was, well, Dr. Fleming had been brusque, and as a consequence, it was the court of public opinion which counted most, and that's he was basing his metrics off the likes that Twitter have given and the comments that Twitter has given, and you can't. Science isn't done that way, okay? Science often is about elevating what would be an unpopular viewpoint against a consensus, and that's a lot of the ground that people pushing terrain like to say that they're claiming and they're up against. But they, in my opinion, are just resorting to pseudoscience, quack science, and what I wanted to do with this stream was hopefully address some of those, some of what I feel was the mismanagement of that debate and the fallout from transparent media truth. So, and Darlene says it eloquently in the chat, Mr. Young is a tool. And perhaps, Richard, you would be okay with just outlining the first few minutes, because I'm on record as sort of saying you come out the gate flying, and why don't you relay to us how you saw what was happening and what was being said, and then we'll move towards the sort of looking at the science of Dr. Young.
Right.
No,
right.
Mr. Young,
well,
not.
It's what's important to know is the backstory, which you don't see when the debate actually goes live. The backstory was that I was communicated to by Rob, by Transparent Media Truth, that they were very interested in, he was interested in getting a debate going between people who believed in terrain and people who believed in germ theory. And I worked with him for several weeks, along with another woman who was involved with Andrew Kaufman. And that took several weeks, which eventually led to several email exchanges in which Andrew Kaufman was unwilling to appear in a debate with me unless I was willing to change my position and accept terrain in the end. So he wanted an agreed to outcome. And the reason why Rob wanted me to originally debate Kaufman was that there had been a debate with Judy Mikovits and Andy Kaufman on this same topic. And the way it played out was Judy Mikovits basically conceded most of what Andy Kaufman suggested, and Rob with Transparent Media Truth was unhappy with that result because he was hoping for more resistance from Judy Mikovits, which is interesting.
I'll just sort of summarize for people that hadn't seen that. So if you go back and watch the debate between Judy Mikovits and Andrew Kaufman, there's only one component where Judy puts up any resistance, where she definitively says that viruses are real, they do experiments with them, etc. And that was it. The rest was a sort of pat a cake exchange where nothing was really achieved, and in my opinion just helped confuse people and reinforce the viewpoint of those taking this alternative approach, who have basically, all they've done at the moment is profit from the current situation, because they want, everyone's got a particularly vested view in what goes on, particularly in the United States. Opinions get very polarized, and it was a disappointment. And so I guess the response to that then is why would they be upset with coming out the gate a little hot?
Yeah, well, certainly for somebody who was disappointed that the first debate really was fell flat, and so Kaufman refused then to appear in a debate with me, and about 3 or 4 days before the actual debate was recorded, I got notified by Rob that they had a Dr. Young who wanted to come on and present for terrain. And I said, so that's great. And I got his name, and I looked to see what papers he might have published. An intelligent approach, I always think, when you're going to debate somebody, is to find out what they're knowledgeable in, what they've published in, what their proof of what they're talking about is. And I couldn't find any papers in the National Library of Medicine. I could find lots of stuff that were just articles that, were opinions that he'd written, which is great. My mother had opinions, but it wouldn't make her a scientist. My father was a carpenter and he had plenty of opinions, but it didn't make him a scientist. He was an outstanding carpenter. Which, is a point actually worth making, because and I've heard you say this, and I would agree that having degrees does not necessarily give you carte blanche to do anything. But obviously, to get the degrees, you had to demonstrate some work in a field to get that degree, and so you establish yourself as having some experience, at least under the tutelage of somebody else. My father had an 8th grade education because he was raised during the Depression, and that's as far as he could get when he went to work for the family. And he became a carpenter, and he was one of the best carpenters I ever knew on the planet, but he didn't have a PhD or a master's or a bachelor's. He didn't even have a high school diploma. And so I think I've always taken the position, because of that you don't need to sell me that you have a degree. What you have to sell me on is the competency of your argument, and that you yourself have the credibility to be discussing the topic. And that is shown by your experience in working in that area and how well you understand that area. So it didn't bother me so much that Mr. Young didn't have a PhD or an MD. But in preparation for this, I went in with an attitude of, you want a debate, you want us to compare terrain versus germ theory. They were unhappy with the first go round, and I had prepared information to try to show on slides to share with information so people could see articles, because they're constantly talking about, is there proof of the virus? Is there proof that it's been cultured? All the steps that Kaufman likes to throw out about, Cook's postulates. So I had prepared all that stuff and wanted to be able to share that, but recognized probably about a half an hour to an hour beforehand that we weren't going to be able to do that. So it's like, okay, that's fine. We're only going to get to speak 5 minutes each. I'll keep these available to try to share. And we'll discuss the two different theories. But the first thing that Mr. Young came out of the starting gate with was a whole bunch of misinformation, credentialing himself as some type of expert in something to which he has nothing to claim expertise in. He doesn't have these degrees. He doesn't have the research experience. He doesn't have the published papers. And, it was not my intention to really bring up the legal scenario until you realize that the legal scenario, he threw a doctor and a nurse under the bus by getting them to give the IV sodium bicarbonate solution to a patient. Now, why, they were dumb enough to do that is beyond me. But that's how he dealt with that, which is, well, he didn't give the solution, and technically that's correct. He talked somebody else into doing it for him, and they got taken down in the process. But the first few minutes of debate are critical to establish something. And I've done debate classes since 7th grade. And the two things is that if the opponent presents something that is just incredibly invalid and taints the debate, you have to address that whether you want to or not, because if you don't address that, you have acquiesced to it and agreed with it. I get that all the time in medicine. I could be standing at a social gathering, although not today because we don't social gather today, but I could be standing at a social gathering and somebody could raise a topic about heart disease. And it doesn't matter how much I don't want to be a part of it. If what they're saying is incorrect or wrong and I don't address it, what I hear later is, well, they must be right because Dr. Fleming didn't disagree with it. So, the system has done a very good job of training me that if something is blatantly wrong and you're in a debate or you're in a setting, you have to respond to it. So when he started laying out a litany of misinformation, placing himself as this expert in a topic that he's not an expert in, taking credit in hematology and stating he's doing blood work on coagulopathies or blood clotting abnormalities. I mean, everything that he was actually claiming relates to the theory that I came out with and published beginning in 1994. So he was actually coming out and saying he was the expert in the theory that I'm the one who actually published. And prior to 2 or 3 days before the debate, I'd never heard of Mr. Young, although I've certainly seen lots of stuff out there now. So, yeah, it was, you know, as I listened minute after minute after minute, which seemed like an eternity to me with the misinformation, I thought, this has got to stop now. And it wasn't a nice, gentle, kumbaya, let me give you a hug, you're a really nice guy, but I just tisk don't agree with that. This was just blatantly wrong.
Yes, and I would support the contention that if you don't step in at some point and you know, put your head above the parapet and say, hang on a minute, you're wrong, and if you don't do that, like you say, by implication, you're in effect agreeing with them. And I've, you know, I had people sort of say to me at the beginning, why are you going after Kaufman so hard? I was like, well, but no one else is doing it, and it seems a bizarre thing to be having signal boosted at a time where people needed access to clear and unambiguous instruction on what they should and shouldn't be doing. And I think that has held, it was obviously the right decision over the long term, and I think we'll see that what you did with respect to you're challenging, and I'll use my term, what you could see as a grifter, right? Someone claiming that they'd become the expert in an area where you had published, okay? And if someone came in and started speaking about the area of the brain and Tourette's and deep brain stimulation where I'd published and they hadn't done anything approximating that type of work and were just opining on it. And so I often hear that with respect to, well, in my case, why are you using monkeys? And to the inherent dangers of having hardware in the brain that's putting in signals to control abnormal signals. And this, it was always there, and it's incumbent upon the person who has the actual information to speak in a manner in which the public can understand and relate to. And so I think that's I don't think we need to dwell on the beginning aspects of that talk. I mean, it was a long couple of hours. I think what I would like to do is, as you're here and you are the expert on sort of coagulopathies and blood work, etc., we can perhaps go through and look at some of the more egregious distortions to the science that's being put out there. And people that have been following this channel now will see it's the same argument, and often it's the same slides as well. And perhaps, if that's okay with you, if you don't have anything else to say with the opening sections, we could move what I think would be the more interesting component of our discussion.
Yes, please do that. The only thing I want to say is in recognition of your work, and this is the importance of maintaining credibility and being seen as credible, because it was your understanding, what was obvious to me on the coagulopathy part, on the inflammatory thrombotic response occurring with comorbidities with COVID-19. What was obvious to you was the neurologic manifestations. And by listening to you and recognizing your credibility, caused me to go back and look at a lot of the neurologic information that was coming out, which opened up for me a better understanding of that aspect of COVID that I would not have had without listening to you.
And well, thank you for the compliments. And I would just add to people that are listening, there's an issue that we do have, that the medicine is so complex that it's they essentially do become a sort of non-overlapping magisteria, each discipline, and everyone gets wrapped up in their own little world, and it's very difficult to sort of get crosstalk a lot of the time. And if there's one good thing that's come out of this current iteration of SARS, is that many experts in different fields have had to come together under very unusual circumstances and try to sort of get towards a ground truth. So whether that's discussing the origins of SARS to people at the beginning thinking it was going to be a viral pneumonia, to understanding the impact on the brain, as I was focusing on. And what I would add right now is, and I don't know if you want to comment on this, but there's a very large disparity of responses that we're dealing with, which I think has lent a sense that people who do have objections to any particular part of the science, because the clinical spectrum is so wide, that they've been able to pick at this very new emerging cross-disciplinary approach we've had to take, and made it that much more difficult.
I'm not sure I understood the question.
Yeah, so the we're talking about the people have to sort of
interact more.
Yeah, so we have to interact more across disciplines. But there's a component of SARS which causes a very large spectrum of responses. So in some cases it's very much in the cardiologist domain, because it's in the ICU, versus the more theoretical aspects, and also the population response is so different among different types of old people, comorbid, etc. And all this relates to the confusion that people have right now. And I think it's lent an avenue for people like the terrain theory pushers to get in, to give themselves an audience, and an audience who wants to sort of believe in what they're saying, that there is no viruses, it's all internal.
That's true just about any time something new comes out. I was in medical school when HIV came out, and the chaos that caused by trying to come to grips with something that hadn't been seen before. One of the problems for medicine in general is that there's really two types of people that go into medicine. There are just very good memorizers that are extremely good at regurgitating a huge amount of information as long as it's been taught to them. And that, by and large, fits the vast majority of medical practitioners. Then there's a smaller group that are really more scientists like myself. Most of us have PhD, MD combinations, and we're interested in research, but the idea of being in a clinic day after day after day drives us a little bit nuts, because we want something more of a challenge. So it is, for the vast majority of physicians, they find themselves in an uncomfortable setting of having a new disease that they really don't fully understand how to treat, because nobody has taught them how to treat it yet. And they're very vulnerable when the general public asks questions about the disease, which causes the general public to lack some credibility for the medical community, which then opens up opportunities for what you call grifters to come in and snatch up and say, well, we have the answer for you. It's this wonderful thing that these people don't understand. And when the medical community is struggling with how to respond to this, it gives opportunities for these other people to come in. And the problem for medicine, I think my biggest criticism of it right now is that this is a disease with all the ramifications of a viral disease that I talked about dating back to 1994, which was not paid attention to even currently. I mean, there are still people struggling with, so is this cytokine release syndrome, or what is it? And they're not fully understanding that it's an inflammothrombotic response. And they also, physicians did not pay attention to all the work that was published in the early 2000s about ventilator settings and how to correctly do that in these inflammothrombotic responses of ARDS. And so when all these patients came into the hospitals to start getting treated, the physicians, the medical community were not up to speed, and they looked bad as a result, and they still look bad as a result. And because many places are not talking, for example, I know one major university in the United States that claims to have been very successful with its COVID patients, but the doctors that are taking care of those patients will not share that information with the rest of the medical community at that university because they want to publish the paper on it. So it has produced, it goes back to that discord that we were talking about earlier, changes in science and medicine over time. It's produced a disheveling effect in the medical community. And those gaps are obvious to see because this virus isn't just being talked about in the medical community like HIV really was, although HIV was talked about a little bit in society. This virus has been brought center stream throughout the world, and that opens up lots of gaps for these other individuals to jump into and fill. And if it's one thing we've learned, is that people will do just about anything if you give them a sense of security. Follow my lead, do what I tell you to do, and you will be safe. That's how the Patriot Act got passed. That's how it got repassed with COVID. It was part of that part of the packages I went through with that initial funding of checks was the reinstallment of the Patriot Act in the United States. And so people will do whatever you tell them to do if you say, no, if you do this, you'll be safe. And for people like me, I won't give you that type of reassurance. I'm still sitting here saying, I'm still collecting my data. Give me a chance to dig through the analysis, and then I'll tell you what it is, but it's probably not gonna come with 100% certainty.
Yeah, and I think I hope that's what people are beginning to realize now, is that there's always ambiguity in these circumstances, particularly at the beginning of such events. And like I say, the human body is not a car, right? And it's not like you just take it down to the mechanics and there's a manual for taking out and replacing each piece. And go on.
One of the jokes that we learned in medical school was, the auto mechanic says, well, I'm just as good as a heart doctor. I operate on the engine and that's the heart of the car. And our response is, yeah, well, let's see you do that while it's running.
Right.
Very a little bit more challenging. Yeah. And 90, one of my former faculty professors used to say that 90% of surgery could be performed by a chimpanzee, but it's at 10% when something's different, when you go inside and you start doing the surgery, that something's different, that you need that human element of training to say, I think we better do this. And of course, this is a scenario where experience is hopefully exponentially growing. It doesn't always feel that way. What bothers me is that the media is doing not a very good job of helping the general public with any of this. And the problem is that, as far as I'm concerned, the people that were supposed to be the experts haven't stepped up. I'm an independent. I'll put that out there for everybody. I firmly don't trust either party, because they're composed of humans, and humans do things for a variety of reasons. But one of the smartest things that happened was when travel into this country, into the United States, got shut down. One way to stop the transmission of a virus or any communicable disease is to stop moving around. Quit transmitting the disease. Wall it off. So from that point of view, when Trump said close the borders, well, he said that more than once, but when he said that as far as the virus is concerned, it was the right thing to do.
I think so. And another thing I would just add is that the United States is such a massive geographical area that comparisons to other smaller nations that have handled things in, whether they've done well or they've been on the receiving end of the worst aspects of SARS, trying to take any one of those scenarios and applying it directly to the United States is just going to be fraught with disaster in my mind. And that, again, that nuance is lost in the dialogue that needs to be taken, and again allows for the those that would try to misinform for their own benefit. And I don't know if you saw this week. So, like, the latest version is that Kaufman has been out of the loop, really, because his YouTube got taken down, etc. And now on so a big podcast which reaches a lot of people is Valuetainment. Do you know that podcast?
I've heard of it.
So this, I want to say, in the last week, Thomas Cowan was on there. And so it's like that they're going through each one of the personalities that they need to, whether it was Kaufman at the beginning to the signal boosting of Judy Mikovits and that approach, which again polarized the population with respect to, well, that's where the phrase plandemic came from. Right. And then you get these large popular YouTube channels like Valuetainment that are giving a voice to these people and not having an actual debate live, and just allowing people of dubious motives and skill to be able to push their own agenda on. Well, it's more than network TV, right? If you've got 500,000 subscribers, right, that's way more probably than most terrestrial channels are getting now, right? And it becomes very, very problematic. And there's a range of responses. And basically, Thomas Cowan went on there and tried to describe the experimentation around polio and the experiments on polio, saying that there's no animal models of polio, that there's no that it was, and again taking the techniques of 100 years ago, right, and saying that the same still applies now, and it's the most awful well, it's not argument, is it? It's a kind of sales pitch. And
yeah, they don't even understand that it's not the correct argument. And you can tell from the way Kaufman presented the chromosome 8 stuff, which I saw what you did, which was just brilliant, on genotyping. I mean, he doesn't know the difference between a forward primer and a reverse primer. He doesn't understand genotyping. He doesn't understand the work that went through by the Chinese and people in other countries to get the genetic coding of this virus, to validate what it is that we're dealing with. I mean, I don't, I wasn't going to say, I guess they think it's fantasy, but that's what they think it is.
No, they're true believers. I think that, yeah, that needs to be fully understood.
Yeah, and you know, there's a part of me, as much as I don't like people doing what Young did or what Kaufman did or even what Cowan does, there's a part of me, if it wasn't for the people that are being hurt and misinformed, there's a part of me that pities them. I feel sorry for them, because when I listen to them, it's very obvious that they clearly don't grasp the science. And for them to even claim that they have a science background is somewhat embarrassing, because they are so far disconnected from true science. It's like those pleomorphic, the red blood cells that they think are morphing into things, or fibrous strands. I mean, I learned in 6th and 7th grade how to have a better microscopy field that didn't have artifacts on it than what they show for pleomorphism.
And maybe we can get to some of the video of that last interview. Give me 1 second just to square up my screens a little bit. And let's have a look at the arguments. Maybe we can interrupt. So I'm going to start here where Mr. Young engages in the calumny of attributing to James Hildreth. He was head of, I'm not sure which department, but basically he held a very senior position in NIH, and they selectively quote him as saying that the virus is fully an exosome in every sense of the word. Take that one little quote and then run with it. So let's just have a listen to what, I don't know if I've queued this up right, but...
Virus is fully an exosome in every sense of the word. And then when we look at the exosome in comparison with COVID, we're looking at the diameter inside, which is...
So I'll just stop there. And already he's lying about these slides. These are misattributed slides. So on the left, he's got exosomes. And on the right, he's labeling that slide COVID-19. I believe that slide is from the British Medical Journal. I'll let that play, but I think I have that paper to hand and we can have a look at that.
500 and the diameter outside, which is 100 nanometers, they both contain the ACE receptor 2s. They contain RNA, and these fluids are found in the bronchialveola.
And what is this exosome, just to define that for the listeners?
As far as an exosome is something that's released from inside the body. It's released as a, and there are some studies on this, as I would suggest a repair protein, but as a trigger to activate the endothelial cells to begin pathological blood coagulation due to a compromised internal environment. But exosomes are born out of the cell. They're a product of the cell itself.
Kevin, just to let you know, I can't hear what Young is saying.
Really?
Yeah, sorry about that.
So he was just speaking.
It was more enjoyable this way.
Right, yeah. So maybe I can give the summary to you. So at that, but you can see he's talking about the screen. I have the paper, I think, where that slide has been taken from, but for some reason, it's not opening. But he is just talking about the physical similarities. And whilst I look for that paper, perhaps you could just give the people listening what you understand as an exosome and the role it plays in the body.
So there's several ways in which one part of the body will communicate with another part of the body, and particularly when there's something abnormal going on. Some of those are called cytokines, chemicals that are released from one cell to have an impact on another cell. Some of them are called interleukins, which more specifically relate to these chemical messengers between the leukins, the white blood cells of the body, in response to something. And then there, about 30 years ago, it was discovered that vesicles emerge out of the cells with a variety of components, including sometimes proteins, sometimes genetic material, mRNA, that is released from one cell to communicate to cells, we believe, further distances away, to communicate what's happening at the site of the origin cell in an effort to make a distant part of the body aware of what's going on, whether that be an infectious process or a cancerous change or any of a variety of mechanisms. I mean, it's only 30 years old as a field, so it's it's just beginning to provide some significant information. But what it is not is it's not a virus. And viruses have their unique genetic material. The genetic material typically in exosomes are human genetic material and or protein translational products. And that's easy enough to take out of a bronchoalveolar lavage, as Kaufman is so quick to attack, because if you look at the PCR for the virus for COVID-19, it doesn't match any genetic material that might be coming out of the cell, whether it be exosomes or just breakdown of the cells themselves, and so it won't match up.
And
to the virus.
That's just a key feature that they're not grasping. And so, there's two. So there's the one underlying one is that with their pleomorphy, which is going to come up, is that this abiogenesis in the blood from mycozyma, whatever they want to call them, is midichlorians. Yeah, that's a good way of putting them. They don't contain genetic material and are therefore unrecognizable as being other organisms or viruses. In fact, we genotype every biological phenomenon, and we classify it in that with that. Okay, and so there would be, if you're making and this is, it's better to use something like fungal type infection. You have fungus in your blood. We would see the genes that produce that fungus in your own genome, and we don't. Right? This is the key thing that they don't tell you, and it would be, that applies to bacteria and it applies to viruses as well. They don't have an answer for that. They just want to sort of bamboozle people who don't quite. They probably follow a little bit what's going on, but don't grasp the full range of the science at hand.
Yeah, and here's another thing they don't grasp out of that. If viruses or bacteria or fungi or protozoans or whatever were a byproduct of your body, and these things produce an immunologic response that causes inflammatory changes in blood clotting, that is a doomsday scenario. You know, if your own cells made something that resulted in your body attacking it, it would be a doomsday scenario. You would be self-designed to self-destruct. You only immunologically respond to something that's different from what you are. That's how you know if a cell becomes cancerous, because now it is different from the human cell that was there. That's how you know if you get a liver from somebody else that it's not your liver, because your immune system can even distinguish differences in the genetic material of somebody else's liver versus the liver that you had that was there. Viruses and bacteria and fungi and protozoan and yeast, whatever, coming in, they're different than humans, so you get an immunologic response. But if the human cell produced exosomes that were released, or red blood cells became the origin, either one of those two fantasies that you want to do, producing something that caused an immunologic response, causing your body to attack itself, you're saying that the system is designed to kill itself.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, it's unfathomable. And you know, it's always good. It's kind of like having a counseling session to talk through things. I realize that part of my frustration with Young is the fact that I can't honestly believe that he believes this. It's, up front it was you're lying, but the further we got into this 2.5 hour debate, debacle, the more clear it was of just how confused he is. And that's hard to look at, particularly when you're a professor and you teach, because when the students just aren't getting it. There's that old expression, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. But he has all this influence. It's like, you've got to quit talking because you don't know what you're talking about. And people are getting hurt.
Yeah, and that's the critical factor in this, is that it's not debating the shape of the Earth, which generally is, could be considered a benign thought exercise, and the fact that it does drag. Well, there's crossovers here, and I do talk a lot at length about psychological operations that are being played on people, and I think there's been a long, steady drip since. And look, man, you can always question the narrative, but once they realized that it was so easy to dupe people with something like flat Earth, it just opened the way for people to pounce on a situation like we're dealing with right now. And if any premise of the pandemic is true, they looked at how people responded since, I don't know how long flat Earth's really been a thing on the internet, but I want to say the last 7-8 years, you sort of see the argumentation made a lot, and they probably looked at that and thought, well, we can pretty much get away with anything. We've so undermined people's sense of reality, and they're so prone to reinforcing their own information biases, that it does. We can just start saying what we want, and it will just permeate and fracture in a way that the risk to whoever wants to engage in a pandemic exercise would be minimal.
One of the problems with social media, as I see it, is that it seems to have allowed people without an expertise in whatever the topic is to be able to make a statement and not have to deal with the consequences of it. And the way that I was raised, so I guess I'm old-fashioned, the way I was raised was you're responsible for your actions and your arguments and what you're telling people. You would not want to come to me for an economics question. I mean, I can tell you that you want more money coming in than going out, but you would be a fool to come to me for an economics question. It's not, I don't have a business degree, never had a business degree, never wanted a business degree. Doesn't mean that people who do business, that's not that statement. It's just, it's not the thing that's fascinated me. So it's not where I started from or where I ended up in.
I'm just, I don't mean to interrupt you, Richard, but actually, whilst I do have you here, I wonder if you could speak to the emerging hypothesis of bradykinin playing a much larger role in the severity of the COVID-19.
Of COVID-19? Well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not a surprise to have bradykinin pop up being opposite of the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. I don't have much more on it than that, because I can't say that I'm familiar with the research, except that I know it's been talked about. And I simply haven't devoted any attention that way.
Yeah, so in my mind, because like I say, people ask me, yes, I do think it could account for some of the symptoms, but I do think that we need to keep, I don't think it's everything. There are, there's the inflammatory factors that Dr. Fleming talks about. There's also the latest research coming out of Yale, which shows that there is neural transfection that is not following or it is conforming to the idea that there's this transfection for olfactory bulb, etc. It's not a consequence of the it's not so much a consequence of the blood-brain barrier becoming leaky. I'm sure it doesn't help, but there's enough evidence, prima facie evidence now, for me to say that my initial claims about the effect on the brain and the mechanism on the brain were true. So
I think we're going to find that just about everything gets affected by COVID-19 when we really get down to it, and we will find little side conversations like bradykinin. But the question is that just because everything's, well, in that case, connected to the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone ACE2 system, and so therefore we're seeing an impact because of that, or is it truly something related to bradykinin? Is there truly something related to a dermatologic phenomenon, or is it just manifestations of the inflammatory reaction in general that's also showing up in the skin? I mean, one of the things in medical school that we were taught was, if we give you a symptom or we give you a disease, you had better be able to come up with a differential diagnosis, an explanation of possible diseases for every system in the body: brain, otolaryngology, pulmonary, cardiac, dermatology, gastrointestinal, integumentary, immunologic, everything. And they were right. I mean, if you work at it, for any given problem, you can pull up something, and that stretches your imagination, and it also allows you to see things in a better light when you come across it. I mean, Kaposi sarcoma, a T-cell abnormality, dermatologic, was only in rare T-cell abnormalities when I started medical school. Midway into medical school, it was also a major manifestation of AIDS, HIV.
Sorry, just to butt in there, but there's work sort of coming out right now. There was this morning, it was put on my Discord. What's your opinion about the targeting of CD4, then consequently CD8, and the implications? Do you think there's a possibility that it could be HIV type syndrome, or is it just gonna once and once only, once the infection is done with?
I would say it's not an HIV equivalent, but I do think that you have to pay attention to CD4 and CD8. I mean, I don't think that you can ignore that because this is an immunologic disease. But in contrast to what we saw with HIV, I don't think we're going to see that to the same extent. You're very much aware that I've made comments because I've reported some of the data that it looks like there is an HIV component that was inserted for gain of function into this virus in some of the work before this virus came out, but it doesn't look to me like it's truly that strong a CD4 CD8 factor. But we have to pay attention to it. It's part of that initial innate immune response that we're dealing with in people.
And there's just a factor here of people. I understand people wanting to get back to normal. I've been advocating for people to get back to normal as much as they can. But I think there is we have to recognize that right now there's a large subset of our population who are at risk right now, whether because they're elderly, whether because they have ongoing medical conditions, and it's part of our social contract to make sure that we protect those people, because once that, it's already been stripped away enough over the generations and sort of reaching a peak now as we've sold ourselves to different special interest groups. But if we're not prepared to come forward and defend these people who probably can't look after themselves that well, who might be scared and would jump on terrain theory as a sort of psychological comfort blanket. We're not doing our job either as the research scientist or as the clinician. And one, I don't know if you've got a comment to this, but people in some way need to learn patience right now. I know that's difficult, but we don't know everything.
No, and I have great concerns with the rush toward a vaccine, because my belief is that, the purpose of vaccinating people is to produce an immunologic response. And the thing that's so detrimental to the people with the comorbidities is the immunologic response, because it's unrestrained. And there's no reason to believe that immunologic response is going to be different to a vaccine than to just simply the virus in general. So I think this rush to a vaccine is a bad move. And as far as the other comment, we have, I guess it's really a shame that my grandparents' generation is now gone, and even my parents' generation is rapidly passing, because that group of people seem to have a better perspective about literally thinking about other people.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know why it is that so many people feel entitled. I don't know if it's because social media gives people this power of feeling of entitlement, even when they're not entitled, and no control over what they say and or do. But it is very clear that exposing people that are vulnerable, that from my perspective will have an inflammatory thrombotic response and potentially die, it's not a good thing. Yeah.
Like I said, the social fabric is already strained, and particularly in the United States, is so strained right now.
Yeah, this is a very confrontational country. I mean, people don't like to think about it that way, but I've been around now for a few decades, and this is the most schismed I've seen this country. I thought that growing up during the 60s that we were schismed, but looking back at that, by no stretch of the imagination, I honestly feel the United States is a country literally ready to tear each other apart.
Yeah.
And this is where I guess I would say that, a lot of other countries have a much better grasp. They're more mature countries, right? I mean, the United States is only 250, 60 some years old as a country, and it behaves like an adolescent many times. Where just about every other society out there has more experience and takes a little bit different approach. Now, there's pros and cons to that. To live in a country that's relatively significantly newer. I mean, I've had a lot of opportunities that, JFK administration could not have done what it did for my generation of scientists in any other country. Only in this country could that have happened. And as a scientist, I fully appreciate that. I've listened to you comment to people before, and I don't think people truly understand this, that as a scientist, I look at things completely different than a non-scientist, which is if there's a question that I'm very, very curious about, and I have a way to try to seek the answer to that question, I will probably do that. And I won't view that as a wrong thing. Now, granted, it can be done and have bad implications, bad consequences, but as a scientist, you give me a problem I don't have the answer to. I want to go find that problem, and I'm not sure that everything that went into COVID-19 was necessarily a bad scientist trying to do a bad thing. Some of that gain of function, I think, was a legitimate curiosity of could it be done. Some of it, I think, probably happened by accident. And then I think people probably looked at that and went, explicative. Now what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And, you know, sometimes scientists forget that there does need to be some humility. And I guess the more they're getting inflated with funding and praise from within the peer group, the less humility that they're gonna.
Yeah, and that's the problem. When it's the people with the money that are driving the research, they usually know what they're looking for, and it's not because they're part of the Boy Scouts. You know, it's because they have motives, and then they say, well, we'll just give the scientist enough money to play with, and then the scientists sometimes do run amok, because that happens, right? But the people that are funding it, you have to, you know, what's the expression? Follow the money. There's a lot of people with money with a lot of things that that they're trying to accomplish, I think, and not all of it's good. Not everybody who has money is bad, but not everybody who has money is good either.
Yeah, and well, you know, that's a deep conversation to have. Maybe we should, for the people, I've found a way that you can enjoy Mr. Young's commentary. I hope that you can see on your screen the closed captions of his talk. So are they visible to you, Richard? Can you see them?
Yeah, well, product of the cell itself.
Okay, so
product of the cell itself, so the body cell.
Let's just let it play through, and so people can hear him talking. You can be insulated somewhat and hear, or just watch the closed captions. So let's move on, because we've barely started on his evidence.
And COVID and exosomes have defined here in my analysis are identical in nature.
Exosomes are the release of material from a human cell in a vesicle, a fluid-filled package, that is then released from the cell to go to other cells and communicate with other cells to let them know what the original cell is seeing or responding to. But the picture that suggested that the one thing was a COVID-19 virus doesn't show it as it's not a COVID-19 virus. Exosomes have a certain genetic material that, see, that's not a coronavirus.
No, this is the one.
So already catching him out on the morphology. But let's see what he does say here. So I couldn't find the exact picture. I found the one on the left, but not the one on the right, and I can't quite see the attribution to that. So
if you look at the genetic material released out of exosomes and you look at the genetic material of COVID-19, they are not the same, because COVID-19 has non-human genetic material and exosomes have human genetic material. So one of the ways you distinguish the difference between a round, smooth outer surface exosome going from one cell to another, and a virus that has spike proteins on it designed to attach to a human cell that has ACE2 receptors, is to look at the genetic material. And in fact, when everybody talks about Cook's postulates not being fulfilled for COVID-19, they literally have been. The original Chinese presented the genetic material of COVID-19 back in January of this year, where they took multiple patients that had the symptoms of COVID and had COVID within their bronchoalveolar lavage and nasal passages. They took that material out of all of them. They genotyped them to see what the sequence was, which does not match human genetics. So they matched infection with organism. They have then taken that same material and injected it into monkeys and reproduced COVID disease. And in fact, as you saw with that one slide I just presented, they have now presented it into human cells and reproduced COVID-19 from the virus. So Cook's postulates of identifying a disease and an agent, then extracting that agent out, then inserting it into something that's healthy, and being able to take it and produce the disease and being able to take it back out and identify it, have actually all now been done for COVID-19. So the premise that somehow COVID has not met Cook's postulates has been completely blown out of the water. And the premise that exosomes that contain human genetic material is the same genetic material found in COVID-19 has been blown out of the water. And the last effort to try to say, gosh, it's the same thing, was the chromosome 8 fallacy that came out, where people claimed, oh my goodness, look, the reverse primer being used for COVID-19 is the same thing as chromosome 8, except it's exactly that, a reverse primer, which means that if you read it the way it's supposed to be read genetically, it is exactly the opposite of chromosome 8. So the concept, the premise that somehow COVID-19 is coming out of human genetic material, be it a radically changed red blood cell that suddenly has genetic material, or midichlorians coming from nowhere suddenly making life, or exosomes suddenly having new genetic material different than human genetic material, have all been blown out of the water.
Well, let's let Dr. Young respond, especially to this idea.
And so I would just add on to Richard's eloquent argumentation there, that was a perfect summary of where we stand right now. If you're listening in on this and you're unsure whether Cook's postulates have been fulfilled, they have in numerous model systems. And the critical factor to take from what Richard said there is that we can differentiate the genotype of each one of these structures, be it exosomes or different viruses. Okay, and one would match the human genome and one wouldn't. And well, let's watch how he evades that response right now. Should be quite amusing.
Yeah, is there foreign genetic material, Dr. Young? You're saying that the
well, if you're isolating some protein particulate and you're injecting it into another animal, and then you're taking it from that animal and injecting, sure, there's going to be an immune response.
No, it's not an isolated protein. It's genetic material. It's RNA.
Okay, so if you take a
will you stop
fragment,
sharing your screen? Excuse me, just stop sharing your screen if you're not going to use it.
Yeah, if you're taking a fragment, a cellular fragment, and injecting that, and we know that vaccines contain genetic matter, RNA or DNA, and they come from different sources. Of course, there's going to be an immune response. An immune response, the innate immune response is going to look at that as a foreign matter, no different than if you're getting a kidney transplant or a liver transplant. There's going to be a rejection. There's going to be an activation of an immune response.
That's actually an ideal point to make, because if the genetic code of COVID-19 was of human origin, there would be no immune response to something that's human origin because it wouldn't be foreign.
Well, I appreciate your emphasis on that, Dr. Fleming, but that actually proves my point and why there's organ donation. You take a human liver.
It's a different human.
Oh, I see. It's only conveniently different.
No, the point is that you're claiming that it comes out from the person who has COVID-19, and if it's in an exosome of a human being, it's their genetic material. It could not initiate an immune response. What initiates
the exosome does initiate immune response. It activates the pathological blood clotting factors. The release of exosomes from the cell is a signal to activate the various factors, factor 13, factor 7, to begin that clotting process, which then ends up in all of the COVID cases, of which I think we agree. I think we can agree on this, that COVID patients are symptomatically in pathological blood coagulation. So when we look at this, if I can share this again, when we look at this condition, and I'm not talking just of biological transformation of red blood cells. I'm talking about biological transformation.
So there he's just, he's trying to sideskip the abiogenic pleomorphic argument, and he's going to, I guess he's arguing that the exosome release is, well, it is a cellular messenger. He's arguing that the exosome, as it's released as a COVID-19, as we're describing it, is there to trigger the inflammatory pathways. But then he's skipping, in my opinion, he's skipping out important factors, which is the exosomes don't have these large spike glycoproteins studded all over them, and he conveniently skips over that. And so So he says here, based upon electrical microscopy, the so-called COVID-19 virus and the so-called HIV virus are 100 nanometers in diameter and appear identical in structure to the exosome, right? So I'm hoping that comes up, but again, he's dodging through, and he's a slick salesman, right? Because someone who didn't have the ability to poke at that would swallow it, right?
Yep. He's very good. I mean, every one of these people that are selling this snake oil are very good at it. They're very polished at it. They've had plenty of time to practice their sales pitch. And when you have people that are confused, who don't have answers, who are looking for anybody to give them a sense of peace and it'll be okay, these guys come in with a great sales pitch.
Yep.
It's not science, but
pseudoscience.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on.
Of even body cells. So it's any cell is contained of a foundational element, which you have quoted, of course, Gaston Dessalles' somatid cycle. I'm suggesting Antoine Béchamp, the origin of this theory is the microzymian theory. And when we look at then this pathology.
Will you explain why the cell would release the exosome initially? This is because of a toxic environmental situation. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's due to the environment, the pH, the biochemistry of the interstitial fluid is not balanced, is not in an alkaline state. It's declining from 7.365 down to 7.3 down to 7.2. Of course,
that's anti-life.
Yeah, well, 7.1 they're in a coma, yeah. So it doesn't take much.
No, they're dead shortly. No, you leave 7.35. I've taken care of enough patients.
You're confusing. I'm sorry, Dr. Fleming. You're confusing blood pH with interstitial fluid pH, of which you know very little about, I assum. Because
I'm an allopath. We actually are trained in extracellular fluid.
Great. So tell me.
Yeah,
nothing
like telling me that. That ticked me off.
Yeah, it's very. It's a bizarre statement to make to anyone. I mean, like in my domain, right? The interstitial fluid outside the cell is critical, right? That's how nerves maintain their ionic potential. And to say that people don't understand how important the pH is, and for ion balance, for all these respiration is bizarre. It's a very, very.
I'm a cardiologist. When I think of a heart cell, I don't even think of a heart cell like you do. I think about ions passing back and forth, producing QRS complexes.
Well, I mean, that's close. That's close to action potential, actually, and that's there's a whole inter and extracellular process going on, and for him to make out that that's ignored in science and medicine it's a really bizarre approach to take, because it's not going to run very far if he's going to start arguing with someone like yourself.
That was in his first opening statement too. This is where he's just repeating it. So when he did that little opening statement, claiming all the things that he had done that he hasn't done, claiming all the degrees he has that he doesn't have, and then throwing that statement right out there at the very beginning, I'm sorry, it couldn't be allowed to sit.
Yeah, and so in that respect, in the context, so yeah, we can sort of finish off that component at the beginning. So in that context, so you can now understand why Richard would be so combative coming out, because for me to sit here and listen to this, and I'd already dealt with Fleming before, and for me to sit here and listen to that it's painful. It's like I don't know, imagine a classic artist being told that someone's throwing a can of paint over some canvas is new art and they don't understand it. It's grating on the nerves, right?
Yeah. Yes, it was.
So, all right, let's see if he can come up with a clinching
I'll get to 115. That's where he tells about sperms and eggs getting together to produce the first red blood cell that gives life to the rest of the body.
Okay.
And bearing in mind that a red blood cell is the only red blood cells are the only cells in the body that have no genetic material in them.
Yeah.
Or organelles or anything else. So a sperm and an egg come together to make a red blood cell from which everything else in the body is made. That just cognitively, no.
No. Well, let's see what it says. I'll start at 1:14:42. Maybe there's a lead up to that, but I just want to make sure we get the context.
The doses, or if it lowers, some of the chemistry factors that are being tested there. The shapes and colors of microorganisms are constant. Microorganisms change their shapes. This is where Dr. Fleming brought up the pleomorphic idea that the cells have the ability to change their form, shape, and also function. In the germ terrain or duality theory, every disease is associated with a particular microorganism and the set of conditions. Going down, microorganisms are the primary causative agents. In this case, we spent time talking a little bit about HIV, but most of it's been on COVID-19, which I would refer to the placebo effect. The virus is massive.
So everyone is just
here it is.
Okay.
This is what's causing COVID-19: mass hysteria.
So yeah, this is their only get out, right? As people get sick, and we're somehow finding everyone's what they don't seem to register is that there would be different variation between people, yet when we identify SARS, it's very similar except for a few mutations which we can track globally. Right? And he doesn't seem to. That's
how we know that the SARS CoV-2 in LA did not come from China. It came from Italy.
Yeah.
It came from the Los Angeles going over there for skiing trips when this whole thing started, and then they brought it back. And so the people that had gone from China went to Italy. By that time, there were some genetic shifts, some small mutations, and that was the strain that was brought back here to LA, not the one that flew here from Wuhan.
Yeah, so someone's just asking in the chat, cellular shapeshifters. Basically, yes, AKLM. What the trainers believe in is that there are these proto cells, that whether they call them mycozyma or somatids, and what they do under different disease conditions. So I guess Mr. Young would advocate that pH would be a driver here, that they will form pleomorphic structures. So they begin to look like bacteria. And let me just see if I can find a life cycle image. They form bacteria. Could you explain, Richard, whilst I look for the diagram real quickly, so people understand?
What they think, using the term somatid, because that's the one that was originally there, but it doesn't matter what name they give to it, that this undestructible energy force that is left even after a human body has decayed for thousands of years, that this somatid is left around. And the somatid, which is not a cell, it's not genetic material, it's not anything, it's just dust particles, somehow forms into viruses. And then those viruses with time can change and become bacteria. And then with time, they can change into yeast. And with more time, there it is, they will decay into a fibrous strand at the very top, and then more somatids. And this is the life cycle, which is why I call it midichlorians. Somatids are the midichlorians of the terrain people, which is what they define as an indestructible force. Now that's the somatid cycle. And then you get people like Kaufman who say, no, it's exosomes that is the source of these viruses, not somatids, but exosomes. And then you get the red blood cell pleomorphic theory, which is red blood cells will become the source of the viruses and the bacteria. So they've got three different go-to approaches, none of which are based on science, but somehow miraculously cells shift, and they shift from one type of thing, like a virus, to something else, a bacteria, to something else, a yeast or a mold, to something else, to fibrous strands, which, as I pointed out during the debate, is like saying that a dog will become a chimpanzee, will become a giraffe, will become a dog, will become a fish, which will become a person.
Yep.
And it cycles like that. It's not that they're separate things. They somewhere in their biology course, you know, in my mind, I'm thinking back to where we used to teach people in embryology course that if you looked at a baby as it was developing, you could see stages that look like it might be gills or something else. And I know that there have been people that left from those classes and said, see, this means that people came from fish and that we're really a fish if we're caught early enough. And it's like, no, that's not what that said. It said that you can see the appearance of what looks like gill structures in a fetus as it's evolving, but it doesn't mean that the fetus has ever been a fish. These folks would literally buy that theory that one species turns into another species, because that's what they're saying. When viruses become bacteria, become fungi, become viruses, become fibrous strands, they're saying one species turns into another species. And then when they're saying that a red blood cell does it, there's no genetic material in a red blood cell. So how in God's green earth did a virus with genetic material come out of something that didn't have genetic material? I mean, none of these arguments make sense.
But they're demonstrably false. They're demonstrably false.
Yeah.
We should be able to take those life forms that they're seeing in their dark field microscopy, and this all comes from a particular technique called dark field microscopy, where they claim that because they can look at non-fixed tissue, that because it's alive, they can watch these transitions. And they do. This is recognized in standard scientific research. There's papers published on it, and exactly addressing this issue. And what they are, they're called refringent particles, and basically they're fragments of membrane that, as the blood is breaking down, they form these structures, because you have to understand that a plasma membrane has a hydrophobic and hydrophilic component, and what they try to do so the medium is ionized, if you like, because it's got a pH. You can think of pH as charge. What it's trying to do is it'll try to find balance. And how do they do that? Well, they form structures. Okay, so the sphere being the most stable, and then depending on the pH that surrounds it, or the ionic environment, it will morph again. But there's no genetic material in there. It's literally a consequence of the chemistry and the breakdown products in the blood. There's no there's no special midichlorians here. And I've got one. Someone asked in the question. Jenny Simon says, "What about the sample from 2019, which showed a sample of SARS CoV-2 in sewage?" I would say that it's not a mystery in science that you do get false positives. We do understand that. That's one of the big issues with the PCR testing right now. It's why I'm against the sort of mass screening that they're doing now, unless, well, I mean, I sort of take Richard's stance, where Richard says the doctor needs to order the test, right, rather than people just turn up for a test. And there's been no replication of that. And again, I would say Spain was very much in the middle of one of the countries most impacted by SARS CoV-2. I'm expecting contamination of some form for that result. Nothing else has supported that contention, and the only data that does seem consistent is that the release or it emerged in Wuhan in October. There's plenty of evidence for that, rather than December, January, like the Chinese are claiming. And I think that's the earliest we can push it back. So Mr. Young is trying to claim that this, as Richard eloquently described, the somatid cycle, there's no experimental evidence supporting this other than observation through dark field microscopy, and like I say, you're prone to all sorts of artifacts in that circumstance.
Hysteria, which is a major contributing factor to a lot of the symptomologies that are coming on.
So everyone keeling over with coagulopathy. Perhaps, Richard, you could just explain to people the feedback mechanisms required that need to be sort of gone through to even get to that state, right?
Well, so homeostasis, the balancing mechanism of the body, is applicable to just about to every organ system that exists. The human body is designed to form blood clots and to break down blood clots consistently in response to what's happening, but it really requires more of a push to form the blood clot, which is typically the result of some type of physical damage to tissue. And that physical damage to tissue in the case of a viral infection occurs when these chemicals, cytokines and interleukins, are released by the immune system in an effort to destroy the cells where the virus is replicating. As a result of that, there is damage, and there's also damage to the surrounding vascularity, blood vessels, because once the chemicals are released, they don't just discriminate and attack where the virus is, they kill everything. The holes that are punched in the vasculature, the small blood vessels, capillaries, and smaller arteries and arterioles and venules, result in the loss of blood through those blood vessels. To respond to that, then there's more than one pathway that occurs, but there is a matter of glycoprotein 2B3A that can be exposed. There's thromboxane A2 from platelets that can be activated. There is the fibrinogen attachment to damaged blood vessels that start precipitating clot formation. But at the same time that blood clots are being formed, those blood clots are also usually being broken down. And how do we know that? Well, in cardiology, we're very big on trying to use what's called thrombolytics, chemicals that are designed to break down blood clots. Many of those were found in human bodies. For example, one that's classically known by the general public is tissue plasminogen activator, or TPA, which was discovered in pulmonary blood vessels, because you don't want a big blood clot in the lung, because that will kill you. It'll deprive blood from getting to the lung. It'll deprive oxygen from getting through the alveoli, the air sacs, and the lungs into the bloodstream. Streptokinase was one of the early ones from one of the bacteria. There's urokinase, which was discovered in kidneys, urine, urokinase. So in a normal functioning human body, whenever there's damage done and a blood clot is being formed, there's also the tendency for the counter measuring release of chemicals to dissolve that blood clot, to restore everything back to normal, so that the damaged tissue is sealed and blood can continue to flow. In people with either immune naive, that is to say they have an immune deficiency syndrome, or they're diabetic or something, so that they're not mounting an expected response, or they have a hyperimmunologic state where they have coronary artery disease or cancer or high blood pressure or diabetes or a variety of other inflammatory disorders that have geared up the system. Those individuals are less in homeostatic balance, because they're kind of in a hyperactive state and the body is used to that. So they will tend to form more inflammation, more blood clotting, and dissolve less of it. So when COVID-19 comes in, or something that is able to have an immunologic response to it precipitating more of this inflammation and blood clotting, the system is already swung out of balance, and blood clotting more often than not will form. And that's what's really killing the people with COVID-19, or these inflammatory states where this fluid fills up in the lungs so you can't exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide very well, or the blood clotting occurs in major blood vessels, including in the lungs, producing something called pulmonary emboli, or producing what you would call a stroke, what I call a CVA, cerebrovascular accident, and throughout the rest of the body. But that normally, that system is pretty well balanced. Or again, it's kind of like the midichlorian thing. If it wasn't in balance and you tended to form these blood clots out of balance, people would have organs clotting all the time, and you wouldn't live to be probably reproductive age. So the system works only because it's in a constant state of forming blood clotting, dissolving blood clotting, forming, dissolving, until you get scenarios like we do with these comorbidities, and then you add insult to injury. And in fact, one of the one of the first articles I wrote when I came out with the inflammation and cardiovascular disease theory in 1994 was, I said, you know, I showed that how infectious disease was the #1 cause of death in people prior to the advent of antibiotics to bring these things under control, these bacterial infections under control. And then it became heart disease as our diets and lifestyles got worse and worse and worse, produced more of this inflammatory process. And I actually concluded in one of my original papers that I expected to see, since viruses and bacteria are part of the 12 factors that I had identified to cause this inflammothrombotic process, that I expected to see infections play a larger role in the formation of heart disease and strokes. And that was back in the 1990s. And what COVID-19 has done is actually validated that theory, unfortunately, because it has been a virus that has been so well spread, and I would argue because of the gain of function that occurred, that made it more effective to be transmitted and spread from person to person than we typically see. But they weren't expecting, I don't think they calculated this inflammothrombotic response. It's clear the medical community didn't embrace it right away, because we're still struggling with getting people to recognize this and treat it.
Well, it was considered a viral pneumonia.
They just kind of stopped with the viral pneumonia and didn't go any further than that.
And let me just ask a quick question, and on your very in-depth response there. And the chances it's good. People need to, they can get the mind chewing gum from the grifter channels if they want, but if they want to understand what's actually going on, and we're not part of the establishment, okay, but we can speak to the issue. I think people want to hear these. And I'm sorry I actually interrupted it, but
that's okay. It's probably boring.
No, it's not. It's crucial. It's crucial to understanding. But the question I wanted to ask is, in your medical opinion, what's the chance of some hysteria, paranoia, or anxiety triggering this coagulopathy to occur?
Well, I think if in your hysteria you run your vehicle into a telephone pole and end up in the hospital with blood clots, you stand a good shot. But, that term hysteria, I'm not a big fan of it, because, it implies some type of mental imbalance. And the only mental imbalance is in the terrain theory.
Right.
In other words, no, you can't. You're not. Look, there wasn't mass hysteria occurring throughout the world when COVID-19 hit the planet. The numbers aren't going down because there's less mass hysteria. I mean, look at the streets of the United States. There's not less mass hysteria.
No.
It has nothing to do with this virus. And when, that was just one of those moments that, and you can see, unfortunately, this is only halfway through. And I know we're coming up to the red blood cell thing coming from sperm and eggs. So I want to see that and let everybody hear that. But it took this long for him to finally let down his guard enough to let this dribble come out. That is what they believe. And that this is kind of like, please, would you tell everybody in the world this, that the reason why people are dying is because they're hysterical?
Yes, he can't.
You bad, stupid people that died, you hundreds of thousands of people who have died, you died from hysteria.
Yeah,
I find that as a physician so insulting, not to me, but to the general public, that you would try to sell that. Now, he would not normally say that. I'm convinced this is the first time I've heard one of these guys come out and just state it like it is, but it took an hour and 15 minutes, and I hate to say it, of me wearing him down, so he got to the place where he just said it, where he thinks it comes from. And when 115, that mass hysteria and red blood cells coming from sperm and egg came out, I thought, we must be done. This is dead. And it lasted another hour and 15 minutes, which I couldn't believe. But it's like, wow, this is what, if you really believe that, Mr. Young, you are deluded. But because of your delusion, and it appears that you believe it, you are harming many, many people. And one of the problems with medicine is this: for most of us, when we know something is so off base, we don't even address it, right? Because it's too, you can't take it seriously. It's a waste of time. It's only when, for this type of setting, with all the work that we're doing, and as long as this has lasted, and the impact that these people are having, that, you stood up and said, wait a minute, Kaufman, stop the nonsense. I said, okay, Kaufman, you don't even want to debate with me. That's fine. Young, stop the nonsense. You guys have got to quit selling this. And I know why you're doing it, because people, the same group that they're basically selling the argument to, want to go without wearing masks and want to go back into society. And I get that. But you can't get back to normal with an argument that's wrong. And if somebody is playing all of us, whoever that might be, they're certainly not going to give up based upon a stupid, nonsensical argument that doesn't make sense. They're just going to laugh at that. So if whoever is playing this seems to be promoting the terrainers, all they're doing is promoting the general population believing in something that can't possibly be real, which only allows these people to turn around and laugh at anybody who says we want to go back to normal.
And let me just make a comment to the transparent media team and Rob. You can't go round saying that one side, again, I'm just reiterating what I said at the beginning, but you can't go round saying that one side is gaining edge over the other because people in Twitter are liking it. You have to address the science, and if that means upsetting people, right, by having their illusions popped, right, through actual demonstrable science, okay, you have to do that. And if you're not prepared to do that, and you want to do it in a sort of fluffy kumbaya manner, then literally you are part of the problem. Your approach to trying to deal with this is we all need to sit down and come to some sort of conclusion. No, that's not going to help. Right, because all you're doing is you're reinforcing the one camp over the other, right? And the scientific dialectic is one of confrontation a lot of the times, and
it is.
They like to talk about Pasteur and Béchamp, right? Those were two people that were going at it with the relevant information and using that to try to argue their science. Okay, and I think they would be on much firmer ground if they just turned around and said, well, stop using the word terrain. Okay, we're not in 19th century France anymore. Okay, and it wasn't even terrain; it's terroir. And right, they speak about the tissue as we understand it at a biochemical level, at a ionic level, at all these, at an anatomical level. All these things constitute understanding the wellness of the organism, and you can't just say, oh, it doesn't count because the current medical models is the Rockefeller model, right? I don't know any doctors who are just egregiously pushing medicines onto people, right? And if a doctor is doing that, they're likely to get pulled up for all manner of rule breaking, law breaking, and you don't get to. I guess the US is its own, it has its own issues because of pharmacists sort of incentivizing the prescribing, but in countries where there's a sort of more standardized national healthcare system, they're literally always trying to cut corners and not prescribe you stuff, right? It's not a universal, this argument that they have,
I think people don't. Most doctors want to win. We want to beat the disease. Okay. I have never lived for patients. Gee, I hope I can get this patient coming back to my office every month. No, my success is not seeing you, and you don't need to be seen. That's how you know you have successfully treated it. Nobody does surgery with the hope that the problem will come back. Nobody gives a treatment for something with the hope that it will fail, or you want to win. And that's, what was that? This was one of the jokes we had in medical school. I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm comfortable enough to do it. What's somebody who goes to medical school? You go to medical school, you go for 4 years. If you do a research year like me, you do 5. Then you have a minimum of 3 years that you do a residency afterwards, although it can be longer, 3 years before you ever go into practice. Dentistry is you go 4 years, and there's an optional internship year for some people, but most of them go straight into practice. Law is 3 years without any additional training, so they can get them out to do the most amount of damage in the least amount of time. But only in medicine and dentistry, and I would argue the sciences, is the goal to win and not to have somebody lose. In law, the goal is, well, if somebody wins, somebody has to lose. So, and in pseudoscience, I guess the issue is nobody cares if anybody wins except the person who's selling their snake oil. Because the snake oil they sell is not going to make anybody better. And that's one of the things that just mentally I can't wrap my head around, which is if you believe that and you're selling this snake oil, you are either so firmly deluded in your misperceptions that you can't understand reality, or you don't care enough about whether somebody is harmed or not. And it may, I can't see how that can't come back around to bite you, as somebody that you care about would then say, well, so-and-so says this is a great terrain therapy, so let's take this potion and it'll make us all better, and because it's naturally occurring, it'll be good for you. Well, I got news for you. Arsenic and hemlock are naturally occurring, and they're not good for you. Baking soda may be relatively naturally occurring, but sticking it in your veins is not good for you.
It's like I say, there's room to have this debate, just not now. These people are just they're a wrecking ball at the moment, and they do literally have blood on their hands because people will have picked up on their advice. And just look at the high profile individuals that have just not used masks and got taken down with COVID. I want to say the governor of Idaho, was it, or something like that, just a couple of days ago. And then there was the church ministers, etc. And all these people have had a knock-on effect to those around them, especially if they're sort of looked up to in the community. So all those preachers that said they were going to keep their churches open and keep services going no matter what. I mean, where was the injunction that from Jesus that you didn't need to go to church, right? And you could pray to him in cupboards alone, and he'll hear you. Okay, so we didn't hear them saying that, and now, like I say, it just
right. And I don't get into theology very often, but isn't the expression "where two or more of you are gathered in my name, there will I be"?
Yeah.
Right.
No. And like I say, they don't take, well, like, it's ideological possession as usual. I just want to answer a question to Jenny. So she says, search Pfizer hides cure for Alzheimer's, Washington Post, and search herpes, Alzheimer's peer-reviewed medical study. Dr. Alzheimer himself said it. They found herpes in the brain plaques. There's a understanding within the neurosciences now. It's not something that's hidden, and I don't know what Pfizer is trying at right now, but we understand the role of viruses in these neurodegenerative disorders, whether they come from, and often what we're learning is that they seem to be agents that either come through dorsal root ganglion in the spine or the vagal branch, and then you get something called BRAC staging, which literally means it starts from the degeneration starts from the brainstem, works its way forward, and there's no one hiding medications for that, and we've moved very, very far forward in our understanding of it, such that we're even now, the plaques which have been associated with the disease, it seems that they're not causal. Okay, so we can actually stop plaques occurring, but the Alzheimer's still occurs. So it's not that this information is being hid, and if anti-inflammatory, which an arthritis drug most likely was, it's probably going to have some impact because you're lowering the incidence of, you're reducing the inflammation in the body. And I'm not making the argument that pharmaceutical companies are our friends, just that it's much harder for them to pull this type of stuff than you think. If you want to add to that, Richard.
It eventually gets out. I mean, one of the major battles I've had in my life was exposing a pharmaceutical company that was told people you needed 2 doses of radioactive isotope to do cardiac imaging studies when you only needed 1, on the basis that they said that the isotope didn't redistribute when in fact it did. And it's rare that you come across such a circumstance, and they will fight, and it's not a pretty picture, but there would be no advantage to hide a drug that they could profit for by selling if it actually worked.
And like I say, this the world is not just America either. Okay, and so I would put that in the context of, people who are watching this are likely familiar with Judy Mikovits, etc., and how she sort of tried to push the idea that Fauci's department covered up XMRV, etc. But the rest of the world went looking for that little viral segment, and it wasn't found. They couldn't replicate the issue. Now, for sure, there's a problem with neuroimmune conditions, and I'm sure we're going to get a whole bunch of it because of this SARS agent, that you get this post-viral condition, but it can come from any number of instigators. Right? It doesn't have to be the vaccine itself. And like I say, I don't advocate for vaccines generally. I want safe vaccines for when they're necessary. And I think right now, I don't know if you disagree or not, Richard, but I think something approximating a functional vaccine would be good to have right now for those who are at risk, right?
I think if we had a vaccine that was demonstrated to not produce an inflammatory thrombotic response in those at risk, and yet could generate the type of T cell response. I know everybody was worried about antibodies, but I think more T cell response is really the key to this, because that's the first part of any immunologic response. And if you want to shorten the time for any infection, that's really where you need to be striking hard, is getting a T cell response. Which is, I don't remember if it was during the recording or beforehand, we were talking about HIV and CD4 and CD8s, but that was the weakness in our immune response to HIV. That if we had that type of thing that did not produce the inflammatory thrombotic consequences, that would be a good thing, particularly for the elderly.
Yeah, and like I say, I'm hopeful that, well, like I say, there's no argument for mass vaccination of everyone under the current circumstances, but yeah, I think knowing if you're at risk, if you're having to take, I don't know, even cancer patients, right, are at risk of being immune compromised. Something to limit the impact that SARS could have. And we can do it in a controlled manner, and we can watch for any sort of adverse reactions. I'm not against that. That's what medicine is about, and it's just about least harm.
Right.
Right.
Right. And I'm not going to release the results of this study that I've been working on yet, because I'm still digging through the data and running the numbers. But I would say, based upon the clinical trial that we just completed on the 15th of the month, another 2 weeks, and I should be through the data and have the paper written up. I frankly don't think we're going to need a vaccine. I think we've got treatments already, but it requires a much more aggressive approach up front to people that are symptomatic. Which I'm not sure why we haven't gotten more focused on that. I think people just simply got overwhelmed and just never caught up. And of course, if we start to see a resurgence of COVID-19 and or influenza kicking in at the same time, that's not going to help them get on target. But we already have there are 3, possibly 4 treatment drug regimens that we discovered that are extremely effective. And out of 1,800 people, there was 1 death, which isn't 0. So I'm not sure if we're going to need a vaccine, but again, I'm not opposed to vaccines that are good vaccines, that are safe vaccines, that are effective vaccines. I'm also not in favor of pan-vaccinating everybody any more than I'm in favor of drive-through PCR testing.
Yeah.
I think that's caused more confusion. I suspect that all respiratory viruses transmit, although not as well as this one. Perhaps, but I think if we did PCR testing for influenza A and influenza B and whatever else is going to be passed around for the last 5 years, and we looked at those numbers, we would see a very similar spread pattern. It's just that nobody freaked out about it because we weren't doing these pan-culturing numbers. This one, unfortunately, is better at infecting. And I don't think that was an accident, but the cause of death was not something that I think the people that were working with it anticipated.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. Let us get to the sperm and
red
egg.
blood cell
Yeah,
from sperm. Yeah.
The virus would here again, or the disease would be loss of common sense, and the treatment would be to
there it is. Loss of common sense is why the disease exists.
How to maintain the alkaline design of the body. That's coming from me specifically. Here again, to prevent disease, we have to build defenses. We have to build immunity. We have to put a little bit of the antigen into the body in order to create, an acquired immune defense against this particular entity. The terrain theory would be to prevent disease, we have to create health. Because a lot of what's being done is, rather than study healthy people, which is the basis of where I came out of amateur and professional sport, we were trying to figure out ways to improve our performances. We were trying to stay healthy. What are those things that gave us sustainable energy versus, how do we treat disease by studying sick people? So I've learned a lot by studying healthy people, and having been an athlete myself on a amateur and professional level. That's very important. I think it was very important at the time when I was participating, but very important to athletes. The germ theory denies the existence of a living, indestructible anatomical element, which is a precursor to all living things, such as our.
So just absorb what it is that he says there, that there's an indestructible component to life that is a precursor to all living things, and that is rattling around your blood right now as a somatid. And the statement indestructible is a bizarre thing to say in the sense of
Star Wars.
Yeah, literally the midichlorians. Anyway, let's
genetic matter. Antoine Béchamp's microzyma.
Can I clarify one thing?
Yes.
So in terms of the somatid theory, is this where then from the somatids grows this genetic material that Dr. Fleming would argue is coming from outside the body?
This was Gaston Naissault's naming what he was looking at, which is probably similar to what Antoine Béchamp was referring to as the microzyma. So the somatid would be from Gaston. I hate to speak for somebody else, but
sure.
My perception and what I've read of Gaston Naissault's is that the somatid was the primary intelligent, indestructible matter and the precursor to all genetic matter. This was the position of Antoine Béchamp. This is also my position, whatever name you want to call it. Other scientists have called it different things. I mentioned Dr. Livingston Wheeler, who called it the progenitor cryptoside. This is matter that you can try to freeze it, burn it, cut it, destroy it. It's indestructible. It's after someone's been cremated. It's that dust intelligent matter that's all left. There's no organization of any body cells. There's no blood. There's no.
I have to just stop there. So that box of ash you get back is the somatids. Okay, and it's just so long as everyone's clear on that. So I mean that would be an easy test, right? Get someone's ashes, put it under a dark field microscope, and we should see all these somatids zipping about. Why haven't they done it? Okay.
Something that Young said somewhere I think during this 2.5 hours, I will never listen to this 2.5 hours again, said that he got ashes from somebody that was given to him.
The Egyptian. I remember this. Yeah, he said that they had mummified tissue, and again, nothing demonstrable. Okay, nothing reproducible, and I can assure everyone, if this was such a robust finding, it would be out there and people would be using it right now. Okay, there wouldn't be a concerted effort to hide it. You couldn't hide it, right? And what they're talking about and the claims that they're making are proved very, very easily, right? You just need the correct microscope, and then there are techniques of isolating particular particles with micro syringes, and you grab a bunch, and then you do your tests on them, and they've never done anything like this. And this could be done in an undergraduate experiment, okay? And they've not done it. They haven't done it, and they will not do it. And if they do it, and they can bring evidence to the fore, I'll change my mind. Right? That's the whole point of science. I'm not entrenched in this position, and if they could bring forward this evidence that we could get somatids from cremation remains, I would be fascinated. But I don't see it. Right? They haven't done it in.
Yeah, come on. They would have already done it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they would be waving it in our faces. It's like, fine, you know, because, you know, one of the things that I've always told people is I will change my mind if you can present something that changes it, you know, an intelligent scientific argument and evidence that proves that. That's how I came up with the inflammation and cardiovascular disease theory. FYI, much of that information did not come from the United States. It came from European physicians and scientists that was not incorporated into information that was in the American literature. It was looking at everybody around the world and pulling all the pieces together to come up with that.
Yeah, and I would say this to people in the United States right now and the United Kingdom, those that seem to be struggling the most because of the contradictions it's bringing up with your own understanding of reality and society, etc. The whole world is working on this problem, as it's always done with all these medical and scientific problems. And you would, like I say, you would need a conspiracy orders of magnitude more complex than even the fever dreams of Judy Mikovits could pull out of the ether. Okay, because scientists and doctors would just jump at the chance of a finding that would bring it to the fore. And once word got out, people would be reproducing it. It's not. Right. It's not this closed environment that people think it is. Now, of course, there's the psyops that are going on. I make the case that we're in sort of next gen warfare, etc., and information is a key on the battlefield. But these people are being used to take people off the battlefield, and thus make it easier for those that control information to push forward whatever agenda it is that they do have. And I feel like a bit of a just stuck record, keep saying the same thing, but
it's hard to argue with insanity.
Yeah. And well, I mean, I don't want to be too hard on Mr. Young. I literally do think these people believe it, because I think it would be hard to pull off that type of con as a long game if you just were like, I'm just taking them for money. It's easy. I think there is some buying into the faith, and they think that they see inconsistencies in the data, and they bring it to the people, but they're inherently wrong, right? It's like I don't know if you're familiar with the film Life of Brian.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen it.
But there's just a bit where he sort of falls from the tower, and there's all these they're all prophets sort of lined up screaming at a bunch of people, right? And they've all got one particular take on how the end is going to come, and then the main protagonist falls down, knocks one of these sort of corner speakers off his podium, and then he just starts speaking, and then people are like, they're like, go on, because he just wants to pretend as the Roman soldiers go by, and then people want to believe because he's in that preacher position, right? And then just because he says, oh no, it doesn't matter, and then he runs off, all these people get convinced, oh, he's hiding something from us, right? Where they've completely misconstrued the situation and have gone off charging in their own direction towards Well, they think they're gonna find some perfect truth. And I'll be honest, and I'm pretty sure you'd back me up on this, that science, it's not, there's ambiguity in any experiment that you do, right? And in some case you have to accept that, but you don't just go chuck out the baby with the bathwater because we know that there's a limitation on the methodologies. And
every good scientist I know questions their research more than anybody else out there does.
Yeah.
Because the idea of missing something and chasing something that you shouldn't be chasing, it's such a waste of time, and doesn't provide the answers, that it's easier to be overly critical of yourself than to allow somebody else to be overly critical of you. And I think that's one of the things that, well, it keeps me focused, because my goal is that if there's anything wrong with my data, I want to know what it is, and figure out why it's wrong. You know, was the premise wrong? Was there an error in the methodology? You know, there's whole variety of questions, and that's one of the things, you know, you talk about science and debates and arguments, you know, conferences, when you go to scientific conferences, or about people presenting and defending their work, and other people standing up and questioning potentially the outcome of their data, and knowing the methodology and what works and what doesn't work, and the mistakes that people make that they don't know about when they get started, is critical to the learning process, and teaches you things that you otherwise wouldn't know. And I'll get off my high horse.
Well, I mean, we didn't find the sperm and egg. He did.
Yeah, I was just hoping it was coming up here, but
so I was, because we've been going quite a few hours, and I do have to give my son lunch. But
please do.
What I wanted to do was to, one, just relay the point to Transparent Media Truth that you're doing this wrong, and the premise that you have, that you're going to try and bring information to more people by going down the path that you have done, it's a priori a wrong assumption, and it's inherently biased. I don't know if you want to add something to that, Rich.
Yeah, and I think it's dangerous, because it may make them feel good at the end of the day, but I don't get the sense that they're really wanting a solid scientific debate. That's a good thing to have, but you have to expect that, one, the people who show up really are qualified to be there. Okay. Number two, you have to
that's critical when people are saying that they're molecular biologists from MIT, right? Because people buy that.
Yeah, and if you're a molecular biologist from MIT, you would know the field. You wouldn't confuse a forward primer with a reverse primer. You wouldn't have mistakes in the arguments. You would, by virtue of being that, have learned from people who know what they're talking about, and would have insisted that you learn. That's where a degree is important, because it's this method of making sure that people who come out and say, I have a degree in molecular biology, all basically know the same thing. So if they go talk to another molecular biologist, they're making sense. You know, one of them isn't out in left field, and the other one's standing at the mound. Baseball analogy there. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to say you want to have an open, honest debate, let's be honest, I felt like I was thrown under the bus. I felt like they were expecting to take advantage of me to produce another debate where I was going to be kind and gentle. And I probably, and I would have been much more so, had it not had all that lead up time with Kaufman not wanting to participate, with Young being brought in at the last minute, with we want to be doing this, we want to have an honest debate, and then having Young spend the first 5 to 10 minutes misrepresent things and then attack allopaths in the process of doing it. I'm not the person to attack allopaths with, by the way. If you're thinking I'm going to roll over if you start attacking MDs, you're wrong. I know my share of bad MDs. I know my share of good MDs. If you didn't go through the process, you can't really speak to what it's like to go through the training as an allopathic physician, the internship, the residency, the fellowship, the subspecialty beyond that. You can't experience that. We don't have a common frame of reference. If there's a bad MD, I'll take them on. That's not your position, but don't attack MDs as not knowing things. I had somebody the other day who said that MDs don't learn anything about nutrition. No, we do. We do. It is mixed in with a bunch of other classes like biochemistry and surgery. They didn't just take a class and say, we're now going to teach you about food. It got put in with everything else. But if you add the time up, yes. Does that mean that everybody does a good job with it? No. But then everybody doesn't do a very good job with everything, you know. And
well, that's why there are specialities, right?
That's why there's specialities. That's correct. As you know, the last time I did a rectal exam on somebody or a prostate exam was decades ago, because guess what? As a cardiologist, I don't do rectal exams. It's one of the perks. Okay. And I haven't delivered a baby in a while, but I've delivered a couple hundred of them, you know. But yeah, you know, the reason for getting into a specialty is to try to really have an impact on that. And, you know, you have a skin lesion, I'm not the guy to come to. I know what a vesicle looks like. I know what acne looks like. I know what eczema looks like. I know what amiodarone toxicity looks like. You know, I know what silver poisoning looks like. I know those things, but I'm not the guy you come to because I'm not a dermatologist. Okay.
Yeah.
No, thanks. Yeah. I do nuclear imaging. You want to get bored to tears on isotopes and positron emission and SPECT and planar and MRI and CT and all that. I could bore you. I could put you all to sleep, but it fascinates the blazes out of me. It turns out that COVID-19 is, however, something that's equally applicable because it follows my inflammation and cardiovascular disease theory. It follows a methodology for measuring tissue changes that I do. So it just happened to be on my prime radar to be there.
Yeah. And, well, again, I think what I would I'll sort of close up with this, that transparent media were disingenuous in this case. Yes. I think that's played out in how I know they've treated other people behind the scenes, and I think, well, it's just become incumbent then upon us now having to listen to them, that they've got people that they think they're having debates with, and it's going to have to be pulled apart. This isn't a popularity contest. It's about showing people where the bad science is. I guess, I don't know, I mean, I'll put this to you, but perhaps, you know, Cohen did the interview recently. Maybe we could just, for people, go over that, because he takes a different tack this time. He talks about polio, etc., and, you know, we can probably help dismantle that for people by having a discussion like this next week, and at least put some sort of counter narrative out there, so people are just not getting sold a complete bill of goods. So with that, as I say, people can find Richard at his YouTube channel. It's Dr. Richard Fleming, right? I think
it's Dr. Richard M. Fleming. Okay. Only one M in Fleming, no stuttering.
Okay. There it is on the screen. Oh no, that's Transparent Media Truth. Yep. But I think you could just Google Dr. Richard Fleming. It should come up, and I'll
M. Fleming
I'll add
YouTube. Just one M.
I even got the
there it is.
I even got the doctor wrong, and I put double R, but there it is for all to see. Let's try and bump his subscribers up, and you know, Richard's spending a lot of time doing actual science and speaking to these narratives, and like I say, to see people try to misconstrue what was being said or being done, and pandering to a subgroup of people who, well, I don't know, they've gone down too many rabbit holes, I guess. But we need, people should be thankful that we have someone like Dr. Fleming circling the internet and putting his...
Well, that's exactly what I'm thinking about you when you go through the reviews of the different papers and the topics. People should be very grateful that you're out there taking this on and doing what you're doing. I'm 100% genuine on that compliment.
Well, thank you very much. So with that, I would like to say thank you for everyone that listened in. We held 50 people. Pretty solid all the way through.
Thank you, everyone.
I don't know. Yeah, just hit the like button. Go subscribe to Dr. Fleming's channel. Easy enough to find in Google, and I will be leaving this up. And like I say, we'll come back and we'll address transparent media truth more, and we'll address more of the cranks as they appear. So I think next target can be Dr. Cowan. So.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. So, oh, I didn't record this. Right. So there was something wrong. Maybe my hard disk is full. But guys, take care. Let's hope YouTube doesn't pull this down. Grab it while you can, and because otherwise it might be lost. So take care and say bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
I'm hungry, Daddy.
I know, big boy.